Hey there, my friends. It's Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific time, and I am Mary Rose Wood. I'm here for you, as I usually am at this time. Welcome, storytellers. If you're here live, I would love to have you leave a comment, say hello to me and everyone else, and let us know how the weather is where you are. Waving hi to Anne. It's hot and humid. I know it's hot and humid a lot of places in the United States right now, so I hope everybody's keeping cool. This is a great time to hold still, to curl up with a really good book, or maybe to curl up with your writing. That might not be a bad way to spend the heat wave. Welcome to all of you. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone who might be watching on Facebook, if you want to participate live in the comments with your fellow storytellers, you can go to streamyard.com/Facebook, click the thing, give permission to show your name. And this way, when you leave a comment, I'll know who's talking. If you don't want to do that, that's fine too. You can still leave a comment and I'll see it. So, wow, high stakes. This is a high stakes conversation today. I mean, it matters a lot. It's practically urgent. We're going to talk today about the idea of stakes. And those of you who are experienced writers or less experienced writers, even if you're somewhat beginning your journey as a writer, I'm sure that you've heard of this expression, high stakes. It seems to be something that's very important for writers to concern themselves with. It seems to be a necessary ingredient in our storytelling, but not everyone that I talk to in all my encounters with writers and all my mentoring with writers knows exactly what we mean by high stakes. And if they think they know, the concern about how to put them in the story and how to decide whether your stakes are high enough is ongoing. So to me, this is a really important high stakes question. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why high stakes are important, what they do, what they are. And I'm going to give you 5 clear tips on how to increase the stakes of your storytelling. Sound good? We have a deal? Fantastic. That is the plan. Listen, before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm Mary Rose Wood. Some of you know me because you come to these live streams every week at Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, and I love it. Some of you are my Path of the Storyteller students or alums. Some of you are planning to join the program in the fall, which I'm thrilled about. So let me just give everyone who might not know about Path of the Storyteller a little nudge right now to join the mailing list at www.pathofthestoryteller.com. Path of the Storyteller is the program that I founded to teach and mentor writers how to level up is really what we come back to. We know we love to write, and most of us write at some level. What we do sounds pretty good to us, or maybe it doesn't. And we come to a point in our own writing where we get a little frustrated. We are either not getting the traction that we think we should be getting. People are not responding to our work the way we want them to be responding. Or maybe we ourselves look at it and we go, it's not as good as the books that I really love. I can tell that there's a difference. There's a gap between what I'm doing and really, really excellent, enduring professional work. And I just don't know how to close that gap. If that's you, you are ready for Path of the Storyteller. Get on that mailing list. I want to get to know you better. I teach from my own practice. If you want to know more about my writing, you can go to my website. I don't have a little banner for it, but it's maryrosewood.com. And you can see that I'm a long-time writer, particularly of middle grade, which is what I'm best known for. But Path of the Storyteller, we've got folks writing all kinds of books in the program. And I really love that. I really love that we focus on what's universal about good writing, good story structure, good writing craft. And of course, the stuff that we all share, the mindset issues that we all struggle with as writers. We go into all of that in the program. And those are our themes as well in this live stream, right? So I look forward to getting more of you on the mailing list and getting to know you better. All right, high stakes. I'm opening up the comment box. Hey, Terry, welcome. Nancy, hey, wonderful to see you. Katie's here. Constanza's here. I love it. This is a high stakes conversation indeed. It is a frequent instruction given to writers. And of course, please feel free to talk back at me at the comments. I love to hear what you have to say, and we weave them into the conversation, which is always a benefit. It's a frequent instruction given to writers to have high stakes in their story. And when they explore this question, a lot of times in a practical way, it gets reduced to this idea: what does my character want? Sometimes that's how people will even describe the process of defining the stakes. What does your character want? What do they really want? As if those are stakes. But wants and stakes are not exactly the same. So first, let me untangle this idea. Asking what your character wants is, in a sense, the wrong question. It's an inadequate question, right? And I know a lot of you are hot today in the US. Maybe you, like me, want an ice cream. Like, I might want an ice cream. You might want an ice cream. But that's not necessarily enough to make a story out of, right? Because if I get my ice cream, that's good. I got an ice cream. I'm happy. I wanted one and I got one. If I don't get my ice cream, it's not that big a deal, right? I mean, it's just not that big a deal. So when we talk about wants, that's not enough. That doesn't really scratch the surface of what we mean by stakes. When something has stakes, if it goes your way, it's really good. And if it doesn't go your way, it's actually really bad. There's a consequence, this notion of consequence. Now, you might say, well, there's a consequence to me not getting an ice cream. I'll be hot. I'll be grouchy. I'll sit around all day wishing that I did get an ice cream, feeling sorry for myself. I mean, that's a consequence, but it's a small consequence. It's a kind of trivial consequence. And listen, I'm not casting aspersions either on your feelings, which are valid, or the goodness of ice cream, which is also valid. But I'm just saying that that's not really that much to build a story on. Now, sometimes when we use the word stakes or we hear the word stakes, it's in the context of gambling, right? Like, that's where that word stakes, if you're not a writer, tends to show up in conversation. There are, odds on a sporting event. There are stakes in a card game, right? So if anybody's a poker player out there, there's this idea of upping the ante, of like putting more on the table. And what do we mean by that? What we mean is that we're just lifting the level of play to put more at risk. So if it's a card game and you're playing with chips or money or however, this game is organized, you're adding more to the table. There's more to win if you win, but guess what? There's more to lose if you lose. So you start to see that the idea of stakes has this kind of heads and tails quality. There's two sides to it. It's not just what the character wants. It's both what good outcome happens if the character gets what they want or achieves what they want, but it's also the negative outcome that happens if they fail to do so. So right away, we've got to look at both of these things. We're going to call them, in the rest of our discussion, the carrot and the stick. You might have heard of this kind of common expression. If you haven't, it's one of these like colloquial English expressions, carrot and stick. It's actually quite an old idea, and it goes back, I think, to the kind of behavioral psychology that folks were doing around the time of the Industrial Revolution. How do you get people to work harder? Like, this is where a lot of behavioral psychology kind of got explored and invented. Is like, we want people to show up to work and work hard. And how do we get that to happen? How do we motivate workers? And so this idea of carrot and stick kind of came out of that. The carrot is the reward, right? Now, if you think about who would really like a carrot, it's a donkey that we're talking about. Like, honestly, that's where this image comes from. If we want to motivate the donkey, we dangle a carrot in front of it. We assume the donkey wants the carrot and we'll move toward it. That's the reward, the promise of a reward. But at the same time that there's a carrot in front, there's a stick in the back, which means what? That if the donkey's not performing well enough, fast enough, according to the parameters set for it, then there's a switch on the hindquarters with the stick. So carrot and stick is just a shorthand way of describing the interplay of a positive promised outcome and a threatened negative outcome. So hold on to that idea. We're going to come back to it. So that's the idea of wants. What does my character want, and how it might be a little inadequate to actually just supply the stakes for the story, unless we think of it in terms of a carrot and stick type situation. Now let's talk about something that goes a little deeper than wants. There are things that we want, and there are things that we must have. And the things that we must have are human drives. They are the things that we cannot do without. Talk about a stick, right? Now, elsewhere on this YouTube channel, I did a whole talk, which I recommend, about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Abraham Maslow was a psychologist who undertook to describe in a pretty simple way, with an amusing diagram. It's a hierarchy. It looks like a pyramid, like the food pyramid. What the main drives of human beings are. Why do people do the things they do? It's super interesting because we writers are continually trying to understand how to motivate our characters. What motivates our characters? Why do they do the things we do? Why do we do the things we do, and why do our characters do the things they do? So this exploration of human drives is always pertinent. So I recommend that you go watch that talk in its entirety. Right now, I'm just going to sum up how Maslow described the human drives that motivate all of us. The first one is survival, right? It's just physiological needs. We need food, we need shelter, right? We need water, we need the basic stuff of survival. Once that need is met, we are concerned with stability. We want to have that we not only want to have what we absolutely must need to survive, but we want a sense that it is available to us. If we have a job, we want to feel like we're not going to lose it. If we have a home, we want to feel like we're not going to lose it. So once we've got the stuff of survival, we want the sense of stability, that this is an ongoing situation. And you can just imagine for a moment any person, real or fictional, who is not supplied with these two basic needs, the bottom of Maslow's pyramid. If you don't have the stuff you need to survive, there literally can be nothing else motivating you. That's got to come first, right? And once you have them, to live in a state of perpetual anxiety that you literally don't know where the next meal is coming from. You might have a meal, but you don't know where the next meal is coming from. This is not a sustainable situation. And you see how important this idea of stability is. Once stability is achieved, love and belonging is the next drive that expresses itself on this pyramid. And it's utterly true that human beings are, despite sometimes what we may say, we're not generally that good by ourselves. We're social creatures. We absolutely need a sense of belonging to society, belonging to a community, belonging to a family, having friends, people that we can trust, people that we can share our lives with, we can go to for counsel, that we can, rely upon. And even, of course, in practical ways, if we're not part of a functioning society, our survival needs and our stability needs are going to fall apart, right? So this love and belonging is the next big one. Anyone that wants to know more about love and belonging, I always happily recommend the writing of Brene Brown on this channel. So please check out anything that Brene Brown has written on the ideas of love and belonging. It's so important. After that is the idea of status or esteem. Once we've got our lives in order, we've got some security, we've got a community, we're part of a group that's functioning, we want to feel like we're doing well, that people think well of us. We want to think well about ourselves. We want achievement. We want to accomplish something in our lives, and we want to be seen to accomplish something. So that is what we mean by status or esteem. And then, of course, the top of the pyramid is this really interesting human drive that Maslow calls self-actualization. And I really did want to review these today, even though I'm sure some of you have heard me talk about them before, because the idea of self-actualization, all of these drives, but the idea of self-actualization in particular, has a lot to do with stakes. It has a lot to do with it. And what Maslow means by self-actualization is this sense of our lives having meaning, a larger meaning, that we are fulfilling our potential, that we have accomplished what we came onto this earth to accomplish in our lifetimes, that we are perhaps having an impact on the larger world outside ourselves, that perhaps we're leaving a legacy of some kind, that what we've done in our lives both matters and fully expresses the truth of who we are, our life's purpose, as we say in yoga, our dharma. Like we've really fulfilled our life's purpose, and this is a really powerful idea. Okay, now this, if you think about these drives, and then you go back to this idea of stakes having to do with what the hero of your story getting what they want. Once again, we can see that this idea is a bit inadequate, right? Because many stories revolve around heroes discovering that they're wanting the wrong things, right? Like Ebenezer Scrooge wants the wrong things. He's got a whole story to convince him that he's been wanting the wrong things for years and years. So what Ebenezer Scrooge wants is, those are not the stakes, right? That's not, we can't confuse that with stakes. Stories in general are not about characters getting what they want. I'm putting that in air quotes. The true theme song, if you will, of the storytelling gods was written by the Rolling Stones. Like you won't always get what you want, but if the storytelling gods are kind to you, you will get what you need. Now, as you know, my model that I practice and teach of story structure is inspired and informed in some ways by Joseph Campbell's work on the hero's journey. And Joseph Campbell describes the story, as others have in different language, as being a journey not of a character getting what they want, but a journey of transformation. And not just transformation, meaningful transformation. And not just meaningful transformation of something external, but a meaningful transformation of consciousness. Whoa, mind blown, Joseph Campbell. A story depicts a journey of transformation of consciousness of the hero. So this is very different than somebody getting what they want, right? It's a very different thing. As you can see, it's a much deeper and larger idea, a more nuanced idea. And if we think about this in this way, we are starting to approach the level where we are understanding what is meant by stakes in a story. So, you know, you're the boss of your book. I say this a lot to my students, and I've said it to all of you on this channel before. You're the boss of your story. You're the boss of it all. You are the one who makes these decisions about what your hero's journey of transformation is about. And so for true transformation to happen in a story, you have to decide and design your main character to be the sort of person who is in desperate need, urgent need of a transformation of consciousness. You have to know what the hero needs. The hero may not know what they need, but you're the boss of this universe. Like you're it. So that's your job, storytellers, to glean an understanding of what transformation of consciousness your hero actually needs. That's what it is your job to give them, not what they want, but what they need, even if they don't know they need it, and even if they don't know to ask for it. Okay, so stakes are way more than what the hero wants. What Bilbo Baggins wants, I'm sure at many points in his adventure, is to go back home to his tidy little hobbit hole and go back to bed. And, you know, that's not what he's given, though. He's given this long, difficult slog across Middle Earth in order to get to the lowly mountain and deal with this dragon smog, and you all know the rest. It's not what he wants, it's what he needs. All right. So now I want to get to why these stakes can be so complex to define. Because since our job is to give our hero something to do, we call it the mission, right? It's the main adventure of the book that takes the entire second act basically to fulfill. It's our job to give our hero something to do that is in fact going to be very difficult for them. It's not going to be what they want. It's going to be what they need. And yet they have to keep doing it. Scene after scene after scene. That's a lot of carrots and a lot of sticks, right? How do we get our hero to keep doing the mission, scene after scene after scene, if it's our job to keep putting obstacles in their way? This is where stakes come in. What keeps the hero going? Why don't they just quit? Stakes are the answer. And I just want, before we get into like how to raise the stakes of your story to accomplish this, to make sure that your hero keeps going and doesn't just quit, I want to point out that the failure to do this, the failure to create enough stakes to keep your hero actively going forward through this long slog of a second act, where they are pursuing the mission that you've set up for them, which is extremely difficult and gets more difficult as it progresses. A failure to do this is one of the reasons that we so often see a passive hero, a kind of complaining or whiny hero, or a passive hero who doesn't drive the story forward. Because this is a writer who sort of got the message that the second act is supposed to be filled with obstacles, but they haven't created enough stakes to keep that hero active and in motion. So that's one thing. If there's a failure to create enough obstacles, right, then there's no transformation. So it's super important that the writer does create them. People don't transform just sitting on the sofa being comfortable eating their ice cream. They transform under pressure. So the obstacles are a necessary ingredient for the transformation. The other thing that we might sometimes see is a hero who is so gung-ho about everything that they encounter obstacles and quickly dispatch them. They just keep winning. They just win and win and win, and they just keep winning. And that is an example of a writer who's not fully understanding that if the hero just keeps winning, there's no reason for them to transform either. So a lack of obstacles is a problem. A hero who's just surmounting obstacle after obstacle with ease is also a problem, because no pressure is brought to bear. So we can't get around this issue of both making the second act excruciatingly difficult for our hero, but also somehow keeping them actively in the game. We can't let them quit. All right. I hope everyone's following this. It's a kind of an interesting little thing that we have to do. It's this little self-contradictory place that we have to be in as writers. But this is where stakes come in, and this is why they're so important. The higher the stakes of the overall mission, the harder you can push your hero along the way. And when I say push, I mean the harder you can put the obstacles that you can put in front of them, the harder you can push them outside of the comfort zone. The more you can challenge them, the more pressure you can bring to bear. Let's go back to our ice cream example, just to cool you all off for a second. If I want an ice cream and it's hot out, and the way I'm going to get my ice cream is by snapping my fingers and having, I don't know, a waiter bring me an ice cream. There are not very many obstacles to that. You know, I'm very likely to get my ice cream. I don't really have to do anything, so I'm not going to give up on the idea. But if I need to walk to the store and it's hot and I don't have any sunscreen and I'm wearing uncomfortable shoes and I forgot my sun hat in the car, and as it turns out I don't have enough money on me to get the ice cream, obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, what are the odds that I'm just going to say, forget it? I don't need the ice cream. I'll get it tomorrow, right? I will quit. It's too hard. It's not that big a deal whether I get the ice cream. But if there were something urgent, if it were my kid needing to go to the urgent care, right? I would find a way. Flat tire, I'll call an Uber. If Uber's out of the way, like, how you can be. If it's important enough, you will solve the problem. So this is what we mean by high, high, high stakes. These are stakes that will get your hero doing the hard thing over and over and over and over again. And they're going to have to do the hard thing so many times, because that's what a story is. It's your hero enduring and doing and solving and confronting one hard thing after another for the whole story. So let's talk about raising the stakes of your story in order to get your hero into that place of being not a quitter, like motivated in spite of how hard it is. All right. So the first one that I want to explore a little bit with you is this idea of carrots and sticks. All right. I want you to drop the idea completely that your hero is led or motivated by what they want. I want you to think of their activities in the second act of your tale of being a series of things that they've been given to do, tasks that they've been given to do that have both carrots and sticks attached. And the carrot is going to be the good outcome, and the stick is going to be the threat of a bad outcome. And if you put in a carrot without a stick, it's simply not going to be that effective. It's just simply not going to be that effective. Now, I know how many writers think, and the idea of adding in those sticks, those threats of negative outcome, it can be very challenging because we're so nice to our heroes sometimes. But we can't afford to be nice to our heroes, because if we're too nice to them, they will never have their journey or transformation of consciousness. And that's why they're here. That's why we invented them, so that they could have that journey. And so most importantly, so that our reader can take that very satisfying ride along with the hero. So think in terms of both carrots and sticks. Now, I want you to think also in terms of both mission and scene. So let's talk about this for a minute. And of course, if you have questions, you just pop them in the comments. I'm keeping an eye on it. So the mission is the difficult adventure, substantial adventure that occupies your hero for the most of the book, whether it's Wilbur the pig trying to save his own life with the help of his friends, which occupies basically the entirety of the second act of Charlotte's Web, whether it's Meg Murray in A Wrinkle in Time trying to find and save her father, who's being held on another side of the universe by a force of evil. It occupies the most of the book, right? Whether it's Jane Eyre trying to wait for the moment or discover the way that she and her true love, Mr. Rochester, can finally be together on her terms, which are basically the sort of terms of moral rightness. It takes a lot of the book, whether it's Dorothy is stuck in Oz trying to figure out how to get home to Kansas. It takes most of the story. So the mission is not just one little task. It's not, I need to get to the store and buy an ice cream. It's the big thing. It's by the end of the summer, I need to have I need to have mastered the art of making ice cream so that I can pass the exam to be a master ice cream maker and fulfill my life's purpose, right? That is the level of difference. It's a thing that's going to take the most of the story. That's what we mean by the mission. But the mission is made up of a lot of scenes, right? It's not just one slog. It's scene after scene after scene after scene after scene. So each time you've got a scene that's on the subset of the mission, it has going to have like a carrot and stick situation. It will have stakes of its own. But the mission is where the really big stakes live. If Jane Eyre fails to come up with some solution, she's never going to get to be with Mr. Rochester. If Meg Murray fails to find and save her father is lost. He's lost forever. And if Wilbur fails, with the help of his friends, to figure out a way to prevent his own slaughter, since he is a tasty pig on a farm that slaughters its pigs typically once a year, he's going to get turned into bacon. Those are high stakes, right? They're high stakes. And before I move, and we could throw in Dorothy as well, because I love her high stakes. If she fails to figure out a way, with the help of this wizard she's been promised can help her, to get sent back to Kansas, she's never going to see her home or family again. All right, let's just look at those stakes for a minute. Dorothy never gets home to her family. That is a breach of the drive for love and belonging. It's an absolute breach of it. It's not something that she wants. It goes deep into the human drive. Imagine being torn from your family and your home, and you're never going to see them again. It's serious stuff. It's really big. And the carrot of seeing them again versus the stick of never seeing them again, there's nothing trivial about that, right? We talked about Jane Eyre. We talked about Wilbur is literally, okay, let's talk about Wilbur for a second. This is literally life and death stakes. And I want to talk about that phrase for a minute, right? Because we're often told your story needs high stakes. What are high stakes? Life and death stakes. Like, that's the level that we're aiming for. Wilbur is literally having life and death stakes in his story. It is a story about whether Wilbur will live or die. His mission is a life and death stakes mission. Okay. Dorothy's desire to get home. When we talk about life and death, one of the things that I can also suggest to you is to think of the metaphorical capacity of life and death. If you are talking about never seeing your family again, it's not that they're dead, but if you're never going to see your family again, it's as if they died, right? And so even though there's not a literal life and death in terms of them being killed, she's never going to see them again. It's the death of the family relationship. And so when we talk about life and death stakes, I always want you to remember that life and death stakes are available to you in your story, even if there's no murder, even if there's no slaughter on a farm, even if there's no deadly illness. Life and death stakes are always available to you. Something that's really, really important to your hero may be taken away from them. Another example of this family version of life and death stakes is Meg Murray in A Wrinkle in Time. If she fails, she's never going to see her father again. He will be lost. He will be lost to this force of evil. So there's even almost like a larger bad thing involved. It's not a personal bad thing. It's a bad thing for Meg and her family, but also, and terrible for her father, of course, but there are also larger bad consequences about this. So I hope this is starting to make sense, right? So the mission itself can have life and death stakes of some kind, whether they're literal or metaphorical. But each scene also has some kind of stakes. So that's what I want you to think about. I want you to think in terms of both mission and scene. What is at stake in this scene? What is the carrot and what are the sticks? Okay, so right now we've got number one, think in terms of carrots and sticks. Number two, think in terms of both mission and scene. Try to give your mission some literal or metaphorical life and death stakes. The third tip I want to give you about raising the stakes in your storytelling is to not settle for the first stakes that you come up with. you can and should keep raising the stakes of your storytelling as the story progresses. So what exactly does this mean? It means that even as each scene has its own stakes, those stakes can get higher the further you go, so that a scene late in the second act has higher stakes, more significant stakes than one early in the first act. Another way of putting this is that the obstacles get tougher, the consequences of failure become more dangerous, right? So that stick becomes scarier as time goes on in your story. Now, let's pause for a second and say, but why? Why is that the case? Your hero is changing each time. Each scene leaves your hero developed a little bit. This is a journey of transformation, but it does not happen all at once. It happens in increments. And so each time your hero goes through something, whether they end up being rewarded with the carrot or whether they end up feeling the stick on the outcome of each particular scene, they learned something. They've been changed by the experience in some way. So you can't repeat the same experience. They no longer need it. It's time for a harder lesson. It's time for something more significant. And this is the storyteller's job, to keep moving this escalation of difficulty along. So look at your carrots and your sticks for each scene and make sure that your stakes are increasing. All right. So within the scenes, the sequence of scenes, you're going to be raising the stakes as you go. Now, the other thing that you can do, and this can be really, really powerful in your story structure, is to raise the stakes of the mission as you proceed through the narrative. And one of our favorite places to do this is at the midpoint of a second act. When you get to the middle of the second act, this is a really fun opportunity to raise the stakes, not only for the hero personally, but to raise the stakes of the mission itself. Simple, familiar, and great example. If you are Dorothy trying to get home to get home to Kansas from Oz, and your mission is to go see this wizard who's the one who's going to help you. And at the midpoint of your story, you get to the wizard. He says, I'm not going to help you unless you bring me the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West. I mean, I'd like to help you, but you need to do something for me first. So she still has the same mission, right? Her mission is still to do what it takes to get home to Kansas so she can see her family again, so she doesn't suffer that life and death stake loss of her family. But at the midpoint, that mission takes on higher stakes, because in order to get the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West, well, we're going to have to kill her first. Well, yes, indeed. So now we've got life and death stakes for the Wicked Witch. We've got our hero's mission becoming exponentially more dangerous. It's now life and death stakes for her and her fellow travelers as well, right? So this is an example of how we raise stakes at the midpoint. You know, if Jane in Jane Eyre is well on her way to finding happiness with her beloved Mr. Rochester, and all is going well, and she thought that the real obstacle to their union was the difference in social station. She's a governess and he is the lord of a manor. And that seems to be the big obstacle. It just is it's not a thing that can happen. But that obstacle somehow is overcome by the fact that they are just really into each other. But then she discovers that he's already married. And I hope I'm not spoiling this book for anyone. She discovers that he's already married and that his proposal of marriage to her is essentially deceit and, according to her moral code, like a grave sin. I mean, it's not that she doesn't want him. It's just that now we have a much bigger problem. What was the kind of comedy of manners type plot that Jane Austen might write, like, oh, governess meets, highborn guy, and are they going to be able to get it together, becomes no. There's nothing funny about this at all. It's challenges Jane to the very core of what her values are. and what her beliefs are. And she flees from this. And only until that is resolved can this mission be accomplished, right? This is an example of just making what we thought was a bad problem so much worse. It's still the same mission, but it just gets way worse at the midpoint. You're going to see lots of examples of this in stories, so you can go on and in your reading. I always advise my students to do this. In your reading, you look for examples. You'll find them. You will find them. And I think that the idea that we can raise the stakes of the scenes sequentially as the story continues, but also raise the stakes of the mission without changing it, without saying, oh, forget that mission. We were supposed to go across the universe to find Meg's dad, but instead now we're going to go across the universe to what, I don't know, get ice cream. Don't change the mission. Make it deeper, make it more dangerous. In other words, up the ante, raise the stakes, get to life and death. And if you're already at life and death, see if you can go beyond. We're going to talk about that in a minute. All right. And so now we're talking about raising the stakes as you go. So that was number 3. Number 4 is make sure that these stakes are drives instead of wants. And make sure that you include the idea of self-actualization if you can. Now, we could, each of us, write a story about a character trying to get their basic survival needs met. And there are stories out there that kind of operate on that level, and they're survival stories. They're fine. They're often exciting. There are stories about people finding love and belonging. In fact, there's a whole extremely popular genre of storytelling called the romance that is all about finding love and belonging. There's lots of stories that are not technically romances, but they're family-based stories, and they're about families coming back together, trying to come back together, failing to come back together. Those are also stories that run along this track of love and belonging. There are stories about ambition. There are stories about who's gonna win the Game of Thrones, right? Like stories about competitions involve this idea of esteem and sort of being seen as the winner. So you can find stories that have a kind of a primary track along any of these drives. But here's what I want you to consider. Just as in life, we might look at someone and say, well, they've accomplished a lot in their lives, and that's impressive. But what's really impressive is who they had to be, who they had to become in order to accomplish that thing. So we look at an athlete that we admire, and we say, wow, incredible gymnast. Look at those flips and jumps, and look at her go. But that's not all we think, is it? We admire her tenacity. We admire her courage. We admire her overcoming obstacles. And we respect that in order to be the kind of person who could have actually accomplished this thing that she's accomplished. It's not just about, yeah, I'm just good at gymnastics. This was a person that had to go through the whole journey of transformation of consciousness and deal with, in a sense, self-actualization to be the person who was capable of doing this, of doing all the things that it took to get to this end of mission accomplishment, like to get to that point. We feel the same way often about people who are in leadership positions in all avenues of life, whether they're great teachers or great leaders in business or, great leaders of social movements. It's not just the thing that they do that's visible. It's our sense of, wow, how did they get to be the kind of person who had that sort of courage, who was so willing to speak truth to power, who was so brave, who was willing to sacrifice so much of their own personal comfort in order to do this thing that was really for the benefit of others. This is self-actualization, right? And what I want you to think about, and this is still on my 4th tip here, is let the stakes of your story be drives instead of wants. Let them have to do with these primal human drives, but don't leave out self-actualization, because even when you're talking about, let's say, a romance, in order for the hero of your romance to find the kind of partnership that they ultimately want and that along the way they weren't able to make happen, it's not just that, oh, well, they met the wrong person, they met the wrong person, they met the wrong person, they met the wrong person. At the end, they met the right person, they lived happily ever after. We know that's not how it works, right? They had to change something within themselves. They had to become the right person in order to, quote unquote, find the right person. And so, what we're always watching fundamentally in any story is this journey towards self actualization. We're back to Joseph Campbell, right? It's the transformation of consciousness. And when you think about it that way, I hope that it will make it easier for you to find the enormous stakes in your storytelling. Because fundamentally, it's always that. It's always that transformation of consciousness for a person to truly blossom in a spiritual sense, really, so that these other things that we've put into play in our story can find an ending, can move to a fulfillment. So that's what I want you to think about. Let the stakes be drives instead of wants, and include self-actualization. And then here's my fifth and final. And I see some great questions coming up. Let me do the fifth and final, and I'm going to go through some of these questions. Thank you, everyone, for posting them. I love that. Fifth and final tip for raising the stakes in your storytelling. It sounds so obvious. Please don't be afraid to let bad things happen. Don't be afraid to let bad things happen in your story. I can't tell you how often I have this conversation with writers that they are like, well, I know it's supposed to be high stakes and life and death, but it's so stressful. I don't want to stress out my reader. I don't want to upset my reader. I don't want to upset myself, is what they're saying. I don't want to stress myself out imagining these things. They feel that they are bringing like the rules of good manners of real life, that we don't talk about upsetting things at the dinner table, and we don't say provocative things. We might think them, but we're just trying not to ruffle feathers. We don't talk about thorny things. Right? That may be how you were raised. That may be how you like to behave. I'm not judging that. But this is not the stuff of good storytelling. In a story, it's not just that bad things happen. Obstacles are relentless. Our hero needs transformation. That's why this story must happen. We really need to stir the pot down to the bone. We really need to go as far as we can, and we need to have what is most precious to our hero put at risk. Whether it's Meg Murray's father, or Dorothy Gale's family in Kansas, or Jane Eyre's love for Mr. Rochester, or Wilbur. It always comes back to Wilbur. This is a story, Charlotte's Web, that we happily hand to third graders. We're glad to do it because it's a little masterpiece of a book. It's an enduring classic. And it is on every page about whether the main character, this blameless, lovable, he's a baby when we meet him and he's young all throughout, pig, is going to get killed with an axe, either now or before Christmas, and turned into bacon. That's what that book is about. Now, is it upsetting? Is it scary? I'll let you think about it and I'll let you decide. But it's the truth, and it is just the truth of Wilbur's experience. He's a pig born on a farm, and this is what happens on a farm. And this is a book that dares to imagine that even a pig born on a farm might actually like to live longer than a year, might actually care about survival, stability, love and belonging. So important to Wilbur. It's one of his drives throughout the whole book. He's lonely. He's just lonely and he wants friends. And he gets them. And does he get esteem? Well, in fact, he ends up winning a medal. And the whole resolution of the plot of Charlotte's Web depends on raising the public regard for Wilbur by describing what a terrific pig he is, what a radiant pig he is. He is some pig. And at the end, he actually does win a medal. And this is what guarantees his survival. But the story is not over until Wilbur's self-actualization is complete. And he makes a big sacrifice. He loses his dearest friend, Charlotte, who does not survive until the end of the book. She saves his life, and then she dies. And then Wilbur, having learned so much from Charlotte, who's, kind of a mentor figure to him in her really heroic sacrifice, turns around and all of a sudden is capable of the exact same thing. And he makes incredible sacrifices and is incredibly clever in order to bring Charlotte's babies, her unhatched eggs, back to the barn with him so that he can raise them. Since Charlotte has passed, that he's going to care for and raise these baby spiders. And he's going to cope with his loss of Charlotte. He's going to become a father essentially to these. I mean, his self-actualization is extraordinary. He just he's a totally different piggy at the end of that book. Now, as I said, this is a book that we happily hand to third graders, and they get it. They don't not get it. They get it and they love it. And I just want to show you how adeptly E.B. White handles the stakes and the drives, plugging into these, in human drives. I've often said to my students, Wilbur is like the most human character in literature. He's so human. And this is why we love him so. And, he's not afraid. And so I just don't want you to be afraid. I want you to drop as best you can any resistance you might have to really letting the stakes blossom into the truth of what it means to be alive. Everything's life and death stakes ultimately. You don't have to be writing a murder mystery or a thriller in order to be working on that level. We're always finding that quality in our lives. Now, I do want to point out, before I get to your questions, that the two, enduringly popular genres of storytelling are romances and thrillers. There's just a lot of storytelling in the romance field, and there's a lot of storytelling in the thriller field. And so if you can just see how those, like, survival, stability, and love and belonging, like the bottom of the pyramid, fuels so much storytelling, that might be something to think about, whether those elements exist in your work at all. Not necessarily as we often see them in thriller and romance genre books, but the drives that are underneath those genres: survival and love and belonging. Okay. All right. Terrific. So, number one, think in terms of carrots and sticks. Number two, think in terms of both mission and scene. Number three, keep raising the stakes as you go, especially at the midpoint in terms of raising the stakes of the mission. Number four, let the stakes be drives instead of wants, and don't forget self-actualization. And number five, don't be afraid to let bad things happen. Those are my 5 tips for raising the stakes of your storytelling. Now, let's go through some of these questions. And I'm interested. Here, so Nancy's got a question. Are the higher stakes always a kind of death? Well, I think I think it's not necessarily that all stakes are a kind of death. It depends how adept you are at thinking metaphorically, though, Nancy. So it's possible that for you may find that this is a useful way to think. But when you think about the stick, right? When you think about the threatened negative outcome, that is the kind of necessary anchor to any time we talk about stakes. It's not just all the cool things you get if you win. It's like, and but also if you lose, there's a serious consequence. I think that you will often find that there's a kind of a serious death, serious loss, literal death, or a serious loss that works like a metaphorical death at the bottom of it. So, I mean, always is a question that I'm not going to say, yes, it's always a kind of death because there's no rules about these things. But that's a very interesting um, avenue of inquiry for you is in what way are the stakes that I'm creating within my storytelling metaphorical deaths, and how can I use that to keep my hero on fire with motivation all the way through? It's a great question. Oh, Constanza makes a wonderful observation about a book that we all love, I think, Anne of Green Gables. She wants no red hair. That's what she wants, right, Constanza? But what she really needs is a home and a place in the world. Absolutely correct. That's a great example. And this is what the story is going to give her ultimately. Love that. Any mention of Anne of Green Gables elevates our conversation. Um, Oh, Anne's got some terrific questions here. So Anne asks, is there any difference in the way you allow bad things to happen in a comedic story versus a more dramatic or serious story? This is a wonderful question, Anne. This is a really insightful question. So I'm going to say the answer is yes, but I want to also qualify that. One of the funniest movies that I can think of is A Fish Called Wanda. And there's just terrible things that happen in that hilarious movie. And if I'm not mistaken, I haven't seen it in a long time, but one of the running gags, somebody who knows the movie, you can correct me in the comments. I believe that one of the running gags is that our hero loves animals and is a real tenderhearted fellow about animals. And one of the running gags of the movie is that he keeps accidentally killing animals, right? And through no intention, he just keeps accidentally killing them. Is that funny? Well, in A Fish Called Wanda, it's hilarious because of the way it's presented. It's presented as like foiling the, some principle that the main character has. And what we discuss this a lot in the Path of the Storyteller program, Anne, but when you've got something happening in a story that is just poking at some quality, some cherished belief of the hero, that is called trickster energy. And so in that example, if I've gotten it right, the continual repeated gag of our hero who's got like this very stern set of beliefs around being kind to animals, continually accidentally killing them is, even though what's happening is sad, in the context of this story about this character, each time it happens, it's trickster energy. It's the storytelling gods playing a kind of a pointed joke upon the hero. Why? In order to puncture his ego. That's what the trickster energy does. So there's no simple, like, clean answer, like, yes, in a serious story, bad things happen this way. In a comedic story, bad things happen this other way. But in a comedic story, bad things will happen. They absolutely will happen. But they're going to be in a comic world, and they're going to have the kind of, trickster energy fueling them that is going to prevent them typically from just like getting bogged down in the feeling of tragedy. Wonderful question. Now let's see. I think there was one more. One more from Anne. Are carrots and sticks typically the flip sides of another, or not necessarily? No, not necessarily. It's just that they have to be completely aligned with consequence, the idea of cause and effect. If I eat if I have a pistachio ice cream cone, and the carrot is that I love pistachio ice cream cones, but the stick is that, oh, but I'm allergic to pistachio and I'm going to end up, having to use my EpiPen if I eat it. Like, they're not, they're not necessarily the mirror images of each other, but they're both consequences that are directly linked to the outcome of whatever is at stake in this, right? So not necessarily is the answer to your question. Let me do one more. Constanza, we'll end with your comment, which I think is very clever. So we don't have to kill someone, only maybe something. Exactly, Constanza. You get to decide how the metaphorical life and death stakes in your storytelling work. You get to invent that meaning and ascribe it and deploy it within your story. You're the one that gets to do it. I will do one final shout out to Joseph Campbell before we wrap for today, because one of the ideas in the exploration of the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell offers us is this idea of death and rebirth. It's one of those stages of the journey that is very powerful. And stories have this stage in them, but it does not always necessarily mean that a character dies and comes back to life. It does not necessarily mean that a character dies at all, but it does mean the death of something. It's the death of something. And one of the things that it can be the death of is identity. Anybody who goes through a transformation of consciousness is essentially allowing a previous identity to die so that a new one can take its place. And we all go through this in our lives, right? We give up old identities in order to embrace new ones. We let go of dreams we had when we were young in order to pursue new ones. We let go of how we thought of ourselves at a certain time of our lives and embrace new identities. We go through this reinvention our whole lives along. So I'm sure if you think about this, that it'll have some meaning for you. All right, my friends, this has been a great talk about stakes. High stakes, and how to put high stakes in your story. I hope you have a better understanding now of like all that goes in with this idea, and importantly, why it's so important to have high stakes in your story. Because if there's not that much at stake, why should your hero go through all of that difficult, obstacle-laden tale that you're inventing for them? It's really important. Okay, this is going to help keep your heroes energetic and active throughout the tale. And most of all, it's going to help keep your reader engaged. We haven't talked about the reader today, but obviously all of this kind of stuff is what keeps a reader riveted to the page. All right. Thank you all for coming. If you are new to this live stream and you're watching on YouTube, I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel. It's a big help. If you are watching on YouTube and you found this content of benefit, please give it a thumbs up. And if you are not on my mailing list of Path of the Storyteller, this would be a great time to hop on over there and put your name and your email address in that sign up field for the mailing list so that you and I can get to know each other better. I want to thank you all so much for spending this time coming to this high stakes talk about story structure, and I hope it makes a difference in your writing. And I would love to hear if it does. You can always leave a comment below the video. I will get notified, and we can continue the conversation there in the comments. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific time. And until then, happy writing.